Returning to our climate region schematic, tropical monsoons are not as hot as tropical rainforests, but they are definitely quite wet. Earlier when I mentioned the tropical rainforest climate, I highlighted the fact that the ITCZ is around the entire year. That differs when we look at a tropical monsoon climate because the ITCZ moves, and so the amount of rainfall that affects a tropical monsoon area is dependent on the location of the ITCZ. There's a dry season when that ITCZ, when that equatorial low pressure trough, when that dense rain belt is not overhead, but then when that ITCZ is overhead, when it moves over a tropical monsoon climate area, then they have a pronounced wet season. We can really see the seasonal shifts of the ITCZ, and it's really pronounced there in South Asia. So we'll look at India, where they have the situation of the January ITCZ actually being way south of them, whereas the July ITCZ is to the north. That plays a key role in understanding the climate of India, which is a tropical monsoon climate. Here are the yellow areas that have tropical monsoon climate regions. On the left, I brought in the tropical rainforest climate graph to compare to the tropical monsoon climate graph on the right-hand side. One thing to note is the tropical monsoon climate, when it has that wet season, boy is it wet. And we can note this if you watch Forrest Gump when he's in Vietnam. He has that one period where it's raining nonstop, and he talks about the rain coming from above, from the side, from below, because it was so much stinking rain. That was because the tropical monsoon wet season, the ITCZ, was overhead during the filming of that, or the supposed filming of that. And one thing you also note is the temperature graph actually goes up when the ITCZ is not around. And that makes sense because the cloud cover is less, and so that incoming solar radiation is going to have a greater chance of reaching the surface and thus influencing temperatures. And so the subtropical high pressure you can identify both in the dryness, but also the temperature increases during the tropical monsoon changing seasons. The most important thing to note about a monsoon is that it's not a rain event. It's so often people think of it being a rain event. All it is a seasonal reversal of winds, which I'll explain right now. And to those people out there that think that in Indiana we could possibly have a monsoon, you are crazy. We are far, far away from being influenced by a tropical monsoon. Let's do a case study of monsoons in India to understand the seasonal changes and the seasonal reversal of winds. In India during the summertime, the winds blow from the Indian Ocean, from the southwest, to the continent, to South Asia, to India. And because it's bringing water from the Indian Ocean, which is to the south of India, it's going to be quite wet. And so India has 80% of its annual rainfall just during this one time of the year. And so this causes torrential rains and flooding and all kinds of bad things occurring due to these floods, which I'll explain here in a minute. Next up, though, we have an opposite pattern in the winter in which the winds blow from the Asian landmass to the north of India, there in China, Central Asia, where Borat's from, Russia, Siberia, all of that. It blows from the northeast to the south towards India, and because that air forms over a very dry continental landmass, they have a very, very dry period. And we saw that in the previous climate graph. During the summertime, the low pressure is going to develop over the interior of Asia, the interior of Central Asia, because once again, land heats up faster but then cools down faster, so it's going to heat up during the summertime. And so because of that, once again, a low pressure will form because low pressures will associate with warmer places. Thus, we're going to have situations where a high pressure will then form over the Indian Ocean, creating a high to low pattern. So we see that high to low pattern, but we see that high-low pattern bringing with it the warm, moist air mass from the Indian Ocean. This, combined with the fact that we have mountains here, combines the fact of orographic precipitation with the movement of that warm, moist air. And so because of that, we're going to have dense rain belts right along the windward side or the southern side of both of these mountain ranges. In Bangladesh and extreme eastern India, we see the most amount of rainfall that we'll find anywhere else in the world. And so this is due to the fact we have this monsoon climate situation, combined with the fact we have a good amount of orographic precipitation due to the Himalaya mountains just north, just to the north of this dense rain belt found in this isoline map. During the other time of the year, during the dry monsoon, during the winter, the pattern shifts. And so once again, water bodies are going to be warmer due to the fact that they cool down slower than land masses, and so the land masses are going to cool down faster. So because of that, we then have an opposite pattern happening, in which we have that high to low, in which that cold, dry air from the north is coming and bringing no precipitation to India. Because it's forming over a continental area, it's going to be extremely dry. Let's zoom into a city called Kolkata. It used to be called Calcutta. And I'll remind once again where Kolkata is in relationship to the ITCZ, which we can clearly illustrate in this climograph here. Inside this red box is when the ITCZ moves over Kolkata. This photo is from Kolkata, and we know instantly by looking at it, it's during the wet season, during the period when the ITCZ is located overhead. Although flooding would freak us out here in the United States, in Kolkata they're quite used to it. And so to them it's no big deal. In fact, they've gotten used to it, and now they just play in it. While this might seem to be such a drag to have all this flooding from this extreme rainy season, most people in South Asia and India are actually rural. They live in villages, and they're very much agricultural based. So for them, the wet monsoon season is seen as a source of life and very much as a positive. As the countryside turns green, as no longer do we have that intense dry period. Of course, agriculturally, you're not going to get much done when you have quite dry conditions. And so the paddies fill, and so all types of food sources are now served. Further, the dry season washes away a lot of the dirt and the grime and the dust from all the wind that blows up a lot of that dried sediment and blows it around. One of the characteristics is without the wet monsoon season, South Asia probably wouldn't have too many people living there. And so the wet monsoon season and all that orographic precipitation fills the river valleys, which then is going to then fill and increase the number of people who live along river valleys. More people like to live along river valleys, especially in rural areas. This is something we'll find out a little bit later on in the semester. And so they'll actually have about 60 plus days of rain, and you could imagine the number of other days of the year where it's quite dry. Further, one of the key concerns for individuals who depend on this shifting ITCZ is the pattern is quite unpredictable. So some years you might have too much rain, whereas other years you might not have enough rain. So an early or late monsoon season can also affect when you harvest, when you seed. Here we see an image during the wet monsoon season and the dry monsoon season. Here on the left-hand side on both of these images, what you're looking at is the Indus River in Pakistan. And so the Indus River in Pakistan, you can see how it fills in, much of the Indus River fills in a lot of green areas around the river valley, that's why people live there. Whereas in the dry monsoon season, you can see it's quite faint. So we're looking at the same pattern, but we can see huge differences in terms of vegetation, amount of water that we find on the surface. Here's a passive remote sensing photo that shows the Indus River during the wet monsoon season and the dry monsoon season. Here we have the Indus River during the wet monsoon season. This one is also from a wet monsoon season, just 1 year later, and so you can see how the rainfall totals were a much larger, much more widespread than the previous year, which is also noted here in the September 11, 2009 aerial photograph showing the impact of the wet monsoon season, which just 2 years later, there was a massive amount of precipitation, a massive amount of flooding that occurred in the September 11, 2011 snapshot we have here. One key concern is as the flooding occurs, the rivers change their course, the rivers meander. The before pic was the before pic, before the wet season, but now we have during the wet season, and finally after. And so if you compare this to the first image, you can see that the rivers has changed their course. And so, of course, if you're living along this river, that can be quite burdensome.